We're rolling.
Welcome to the House Dudes podcast, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Jack Haas.
And I'm Josh Koth. Here at House Dudes, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
It's time to do an intervention, Josh.
What happened?
I think we need to tell and talk to everybody, do one-on-ones and just confirm and reiterate the importance of getting a property manager.
You mean to tell me there's real estate investors out there in real estate investing land that manage all their own properties?
You know, have you ever heard of the frustrated landlord? That's where most or a good chunk of our properties that we buy come from.
Oh, hang on, Jack. If we make everyone a non-frustrated landlord, we're not going to be able to buy as many properties. So I don't know if we should continue with this line of thinking here.
I think you have too much optimism in the number of our listenership.
Right. Yeah, that is very true. One of our main sources of properties is frustrated landlords, right? So how do they become frustrated? In talking to them, the number one reason they do is because they're self-managing and they're having to deal with all the negative consequences of self-management. And that wears down the people, even with the best of intentions and enough years of dealing with tenants and all the negativity that goes on. They're worn down. They're ready to sell. So, we try to learn the lessons from that and to not become frustrated landlords ourselves. What can you do to avoid that trap?
So, well, first off is we have to put things into perspective and understand where our strengths lie. Is our strengths really going to be in managing these properties? Frankly, I think our time is better spent looking for the next deal.
Yeah, that's to me the major argument for property management is. And, a lot of people that self-manage, they're trying to save that money. And if you're running your calculations on a rental property and the numbers are kind of tight and you can chop off that 6 to 10% of the rent that a management company will typically charge, sometimes that makes your numbers go from bad to good, just that alone. So you say, well, I'll just trim that and manage it myself and my returns will be better, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that may be the case on that particular property, but what is your time worth? The amount of interaction you're going to have doing showings, talking to the tenants, check-ins, check-outs, dealing with any complaints, dealing with repair, maintenance calls, all that kind of thing. How much time are you going to spend doing that? And what is your time worth? You should have been out trying to find the next deal, which is the $200 an hour job versus the property management. Let's say you have $1,000 property, $1,000 a month rent. Well, 6 to 10% is going to be, what is that, $60 to $100 a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for that one property, if you're spending more than, an hour a month, you're negatively getting a negative return on your money. That's just completely it's going to turn you into a frustrated landlord very quickly and not be the best use of your hourly time.
Yeah, so I'm not going to ever make the argument that if you have one property or two properties, you should maybe consider going through that property management process once. At least then you'd have an idea of what your property manager is doing, and it's always good to have a better understanding of what property management entails. But always run your numbers with the thought that of that property manager in place, at least eventually, so that you're ready for that change when it occurs.
Yeah, that's an important point. When you're buying a property, you shouldn't buy it unless you can afford to pay a property manager to manage it. So run your numbers with that property management fee in place, because you may be able to manage 1 to 5 to 10 properties, but also it depends on your situation. Do you have a full-time job? Are you real estate investing on the side? Or, do you have the ability to spend the amount of hours per month to manage 10, 15, 20 properties? That turns into a full-time job pretty quickly. So you're not going to be able to do it eventually if you grow your business to the point where it's going to be a life-changing amount of properties. So run your numbers with that fee built in, even if it's just one property to start. So at least you'll know, okay, this property is still a good deal even when I'm paying property management. Because I would say if you have to eliminate the property management charge in order to make the numbers work, it's probably just not a good deal and you need to buy it cheaper or move on to another property.
Yeah. So, let's talk briefly about some of the things that the property manager does for us. So not only are they interacting with the tenants, but they're doing the showings, the check-ins, the check-outs, they're scheduling repairs.
They're marketing the property to be rented. I mean, that alone is a big job. We do some rent-to-own, seller finance type deals, and we have to manage the attraction of potential tenants during those. So, Jack, you've kind of run those campaigns, so you can speak to the amount of interaction required and the marketing and all the hours that are put into those campaigns. Now, imagine doing that. If you have a 12-plex, there's 12 of those units typically coming up for the end of lease every year. So you're going to have to run, advertise those units all the time pretty much and be doing showings all the time. Check-ins, check-outs constantly.
Yeah, I just, frankly, unless you have a full-time staff doing that, I don't know how a person can eventually scale. I mean, there's not an option for scaling at that point.
And also then if your time is consumed just doing showings, vetting tenants, running background checks, all those other things, check-ins, check-outs, dealing with complaints, everything like that, it's just there's no way it's not going to hurt the other portions of your business, which again should always be finding the next deal or whatever your particular strengths are, whatever you're going to be concentrating on. And as we know, you need to spend your time on the highest dollar activity. And as a real estate investor, that's typically finding the next deal, finding the next property, negotiating, talking to sellers, being out networking. I would argue that you're better off, drinking beer at a networking event for an hour than you are doing a showing or, vetting a tenant, for one of your properties.
Yeah, and I would greatly agree with that. Unlike you, though, I'm going to say what is even more important to me when it comes to a property manager is that I, frankly, have a bleeding heart. I am just not the one to be able to field. If I'm doing one-on-one showings, for example, I'm going to be the one who gets suckered into some sort of story associated with why they need the place or why, I'm gullible that way.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard this. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, general public out there, but sometimes tenants will not always tell 100% of the truth. Newsflash. Yeah. So, if you're susceptible to kind of manipulation and, sometimes there's a thing called professional tenants, where they just really know the system. They know how to work the system really well. And you need a property manager or whoever is doing the management for you to be savvy enough to, trust but verify, right? So whatever you're saying may or may not be true, but we're going to run you through our process of vetting as a tenant and figure out whether you meet our thresholds or not. And do you have the intestinal fortitude to tell somebody, sorry, I don't like what I saw on your credit report. I don't like what I saw on your criminal background check. I just have a bad feeling, whatever. Are you going to be able to tell someone I'm not going to rent to you? That's pretty tough to do sometimes, and not everyone has that ability. And if you don't, you probably shouldn't be managing your properties. Here's another thing. Do you have the fortitude to evict someone? There's where the sob stories really come in.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody's late on their rent, and you've reached the late period time. Do you have the fortitude to charge them a late fee every month and then begin eviction proceedings if they don't pay?
Well, let's stop there for a second. I just want to reiterate that because we went to an eviction process once, and Josh and I have done this on occasion just to make sure that we know that part of the process. And we were evicting this fellow who'd always been pretty gruff and rough looking. and he showed up to the eviction court with a baby on his hip.
And not even in a carrier, just like literally carrying a baby.
Yeah. So, I mean, they will even go to that extent to try to win favor with the judge.
And, not to be cynical, but I'm pretty sure that he didn't just happen to be carrying the baby around and be like, well, time to go to my eviction court. It's like, no, this was a manipulative, person attempting to sway the judge into generating some type of sympathy. Like, look, I have a baby, you shouldn't evict me. Well, unfortunately, it's pretty black and white. Either you pay your rent or you don't. And, we have a process in place. But if you don't have the fortitude to evict someone with carrying a 6-month-old, and that's not fun, believe me. But my argument is, well, at this point, now you're taking money out of my kids' mouths. So, if I'm going to choose between my kids and somebody who's not paying the rent, sorry, that's why we have the process in place. You got to go.
Yeah, I think you got to really trust that process. And when you have a good property manager, make sure you trust their experience. And I think that's where we've gotten lucky, especially locally.
Yeah, and the thing is, even though you do hire a property manager, understand that your interaction with your properties is not going to be completely passive. You don't just get to go to Hawaii and turn your phone off and, for a year and just say, well, good luck. You still have to interact. Your property manager is going to send you statements. They're going to call you when a problem is big enough where it needs to be bubbled up to you, the owner, and ask, what do you want to do here? If there's a giant repair or something, or a judgment call, that needs to be made on a tenant. Like, let's say you evicted them, but then they come with the money. Do you proceed with the eviction, or do you go ahead and, let them, if they have the money, do you stop the eviction process? Those types of things. You do need to interact, but the goal is to get most of that off your plate. Mm-hmm. We typically interact with our property manager, and having over 100 doors now, that, that's kind of a large amount. So maybe it's more than some, but, a couple hours a month, probably 2 to 3 hours a month of just occasional phone calls, texts, and sometimes sitting down with the statements and going through and talking about specific properties. You do have to monitor and make sure that things are proceeding as you intended. And also just to, again, trust but verify, just like any vendor. So you have to sit down and not every property manager is above board and honest. There's good and bad people, just like in every industry. So you need to trust but verify on the property management side as well, and sit down, go through the statements, talk about specific charges, ask to see receipts if you have any, questions. Because, no one is going to care about your properties as much as you do, unfortunately. And a property manager makes their money from charging that percentage, that management fee. And sometimes they also make money on running a maintenance crew. And there might be some profit motive built into that as well. So you need to make sure that the maintenance items being completed were necessary in order to keep the tenants, happy and in the properties. You don't want unnecessary maintenance being done either. So there's always kind of a push and pull there, and some judgment calls that need to be made. And you as the owner need to stay on top of that.
And I think one of the things that I have to work on, and because I do have a tendency of, like, if I'm you don't want to be in the chain of communication either. Like I've found myself in the middle of a tenant and our property manager, and that's really the last thing I want to be in. A good example is we have a property with multiple units in a nearby community, and based on me just checking and making sure the lawn was mowed and things are being done, and trying to identify certain trailer houses that need to be taken control of, I met quite a few of the people and residents on the property. Hmm. Well, they hear what they want to hear. And the next thing you know, they're talking to our property manager as if I was giving away the place.
Right. Well, the owner said this, yeah. And you don't want to really be in the middle of those interactions because, you don't want to disrupt or undermine the property manager either.
Yeah. So they're going to, like, just to reiterate, they're going to hear what they want to hear. They are going to say anything to take advantage of the situation. And unfortunately, that is the clientele we have when we're dealing with a trailer park. I just got to stop putting myself in that position. I need to distance myself.
Yeah, just let the property manager have their processes in place and deal with the tenants, just by the numbers. Either they pay or they don't, and here's what's allowed, here's what's not allowed. Stick to the rules. Everything's clearly stated when you move in, and you don't want to vary from those rules. Yeah, you want to not be in the middle of that, definitely. You want things to only bubble up to you when it's necessary for the owner to make a decision, and shield yourself from 95% of the negative interaction that occurs. Because I'll tell you this, most of the interaction between a tenant and either the owner or the property manager, if depending on who's managing the property, is going to be either neutral or negative. It's almost never positive. Because that's why if you look on property manager Facebook pages and Google reviews, they're almost always like 1.6, 3, 2 stars. Like a 2.5, 3 stars is a pretty rock star property manager if you get that kind of review. Because if you have a good interaction as a tenant, you're typically going to check out, get your deposit back, and then wave and see, well, smell you later. And that's the end of the interaction. You don't think, I'm going to go write them a positive review. So typically the only interactions or, reviews left are negative, and it's almost a naturally adversarial relationship between tenant and either management or owner. So I just want to distance myself from as much of that negativity as possible and concentrate on what we're good at, which is interacting with sellers, finding the next deal, and creating win-win solutions for sellers. And that's a positive environment. And when I leave those interactions, I feel good. I don't feel like, oh boy, I barely got through that. And, property managers are good at that. They have a thick skin. They deal with that every day, all day. And that's in their wheelhouse. That's what they're trained for. Let them do their job.
So do we want to go through one quick story about one of our properties where we were essentially managing ourselves?
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about how important and tenants and residents are going to hear what they want to hear. A great example was one recently, and we had been saying for a very long time that thankfully we had never received a phone call because of a plugged toilet or what have you in the dead of night. It was just one of those tales that we had never experienced, but we sure heard a lot from naysayers who don't want to get into real estate investing. Well, it actually finally happened.
And the reason we were taking these calls is because this was a rent-to-own type situation. So we didn't have a layer of property management in place. It was, because typically when you do a rent-to-own, like contract for deed or something, you're kind of the bank, and really the interaction should be minimal. But again, not every tenant adheres to those requirements. So in this case, they...
So this was on a holiday.
Right.
And in the dead of night. And she gets a sewer backup in the basement.
Right.
Unfortunately, we don't know how long this is going because I guess it turns out she's scared of the basement and never went down there. So how it finally got discovered, I really couldn't tell you. But all of a sudden, I get a frantic phone call out of the blue that there is an issue with the basement and it seeping through the walls. If there was a property manager in place, the crew or somebody, the emergency response team would have been sent over there and get it fixed. But being I guess in this case, we weren't the owner, but trying to do my best because, again, I have that bleeding heart. I feel obligated to try to help in some capacity. So
even though technically in this situation, we were just the bank, right? We were just the lenders and they were the owner. So if you called Wells Fargo and said my sewer line backed up, they'd say, call a plumber, right? So again, this just really strengthens the argument that if you don't have the fortitude for this type of thing, you shouldn't be interacting with the tenants directly.
Right.
Right. And if we would have had a layer of property management in place, they would have, like you said, they would have took the call, had an emergency maintenance line. Somebody would have been out there and dealt with it. Or somebody would have the fortitude to say, well, call the plumber. Good luck to you.
Right. And then, the part of you in the very back of your mind is, first of all, I felt obligated to try to help in some way. But then, eventually it surfaces the thought that I need to protect the asset in some way too.
Right.
So you start making phone calls and you take it on yourself and you start to try to help. But unfortunately, again, the resident is hearing what she wants to hear. She thinks I'm doing all of it. And
then by interacting in such a way, she starts to think, it's almost like an admission of guilt and responsibility because you're like attempting to help. So now she thinks, yeah, you're supposed to be.
Exactly.
When really, we shouldn't have been doing anything other than saying call a plumber. And it just really reiterates the point that you don't want to be having those direct interactions with tenants if you don't have the ability to deliver the bad news, tell them here's what the rules are in a nice way, empathetically and in a nice way, but just calmly. This is, if I were you, this is what I would do. And, good luck. Really, because it sounds cruel, but if you're selling a home to someone, that's home ownership. That's their responsibility. And you can also take this back to regular buy and hold rentals. Let's say there's a flood or a fire or something happens to a unit, leak in the ceiling or whatever. Guess what? If there's a leak in the ceiling and it drips on their TV and their TV explodes, that's not the owner's responsibility, I don't think. I think that's why they are forced to have renter's insurance. Mm-hmm. Our responsibility as the owners, and this may vary depending on your jurisdiction, and believe me, I'm no insurance expert. We need to deliver and repair things that, in the asset itself. And, so our obligation is to fix the roof. But if something gets ruined as a part of, a natural disaster or weather or something, that wasn't negligent on our part, then as far as I understand, they have to have their own insurance to cover those items inside. Now, can you imagine talking to a tenant whose TV just got ruined and saying, well, I hope you got renter's insurance? And a good property manager, I think ours requires it actually, and a lot of quality property managers do require tenants to have renter's insurance because it's amazingly cheap. It's just a few dollars a month. Mm-hmm. So I think ours requires it, and that's really good advice because, do you have the ability to tell somebody, sorry, all your stuff got ruined, have fun buying new stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's a leak that was caused by your asset, that's not something that is fun to deliver. Or, up here in the upper Midwest in the winter, a lot of college students will rent units, go home for Christmas and think, well, I'm not paying the heat for 2 weeks. I'm going to be out of town. And they turn the heat off. Well, guess what happens? The pipes freeze, water leak, their stuff gets destroyed, the asset gets, a lot of damage. They're responsible for that because that was negligence on their part. Do you have the intestinal fortitude to deliver that news? If you don't, then you shouldn't be the one managing the property.
Yeah, so I guess, in my opinion, it's not necessarily the amount of work that being a property manager, it's having that intestinal fortitude to say no.
Exactly. All right, we'll leave it there.
We've put a lot of effort into providing useful content, and if you found value in the show and have any interest in supporting us with a small donation, head over to patreon.com/housedudes.
And if you have any thoughts or questions, shoot us an email at info@housedudes.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @housedudes. And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other investors out there find the show.
And remember, massive positive impact requires
massive positive action. We'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by HouseDudes.com. Do you live in a good cash flowing market? If so, Turnkey isn't the best choice for you. You should buy in your market. If you don't live in a great market for investors, where can you find profitable cash flowing properties? We love the Midwest, where prices are reasonable and the people are great. We personally invest here and have lived in the area all of our lives. So how does Turnkey work? We find the property, we rehab the property, and we find you a tenant and place you under the care of our local property manager, who we trust with all our own investment properties. I'm sure you have questions about how the process works and what to do next. If that's the case, fill out the contact form on housedudes.com and we'll reach out to see if you are a good fit for our business. We have a limited supply of properties every month, so we can only sell to a select few qualified buyers. We'll see you on housedudes.com.
I don't like to tell a man what to do with his money, but if you ain't investing in property, then you're dumber than a dummy.
I'm not dumb. I'm smart.
Well, buy property. That's my advice.